Hello, Carrie Gracie here, and thanks for downloading the interview from the BBC. My guest today is Malcolm Gladwell. 2 books have made him immensely famous in the United States. So famous that the American language now has an adjective, Gladwellian. I hope you enjoy listening. You have 2 seconds to make an impression. Start now.
It's too late. No, I think you made the impression when you walked into the room.
We'll come back to a conversation about instant conclusions and explain why. But first, what does Gladwellian mean?
Oh, I have no idea. That's something that I suspect my editor made up to sell books. But I suppose I have a particular style of writing which involves taking ideas from the academic world and illustrating them with stories, stories of real situations or real people, and I'm not the first to do that, but I suppose I'm the most enthusiastic practitioner of it.
And who are you writing for? I mean, who's reading you?
I have no idea. I'm always surprised sometimes to hear, all writers have someone in their head when they write, and I have my mother in my head. A kind of intellectually curious general reader, someone who wants to play. Like these books are all invitations to play. And
you said, the reader on your shoulder or in your head was your mum. But explain to me something rather puzzling. Why is it that you're asked to speak at so many corporate functions? Why are you almost a guru for the business world?
Well, I'm not really a guru. And I don't really know why I speak at so many. Well, there's something that's interesting that's happened in the business world in the last 20 years, and that is that people in the business world have gotten tremendously interested in what's going on in the world outside their own, right? So I'm not invited because I know something about business. I'm invited because I know something about something other than business. The world of psychology, for example, tells us lots of things that are extraordinarily useful to leadership, to managing people, to developing talent, and that's where somebody might want me to come in because I have a kind of knowledge of that.
And yet it's not just psychology, is it? I mean, you straddle many different fields.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty kind of intellectually promiscuous. I have that freedom as a journalist to kind of go wherever I wish. Blink was very much about psychology.
This is your second book.
My second book. My new book, Outliers, is a lot of sociology, really. And my first book, Tipping Point, was a combination of those 2 things with a big dollop of epidemiology as well.
Let's talk about Tipping Point. I mean, you studied history. You failed to get a job in advertising, I read. You became a journalist instead. And then you published that first book 8 years ago. What exactly was it about? I mean, you've told us roughly the area, but what was the point of it?
Well, that was a book that was motivated by the fact I moved to New York City, and when I moved to New York City, it was one of the most dangerous big cities in the world. And 3 years later, I sort of woke up one day and realized I now lived in one of the safest big cities in the world. And neither I nor anyone I could find could explain how it happened. I mean, we all had kind of surface explanations, but the city literally, under our feet, went through a complete metamorphosis. And that led me on a kind of intellectual journey. That the idea that I wanted to develop was that behavior and ideas can operate like viruses do, that they're contagious in the same sense. And just as a epidemic of disease can come and go very, very quickly, so can crime if crime is operating contagiously. And then I branched it out to use that metaphor to describe all kinds of different social processes.
And so just very briefly, tell us how on earth that worked in relation to that particular issue.
So things that are contagious have a set of very specific properties. Contagious things are incredibly sensitive to their environments, right? We only get colds in the winter, in large part because in the winter we spend so much time indoors, right? And the cold virus really likes the warm indoor climate. Doesn't much like being outside in the summer in the same way. So that's a case of a highly contagious thing which has a little home. It likes it likes to be indoors in the winter. And so when we're indoors, boom, we're more susceptible. Colds or any kind of contagious thing is also spread asymmetrically. So a small number of people do all the spreading. Most of us do no spreading at all, right? In the case of the flu, we think that it's boys between the ages of 5 and 10 who do all the work. Children are important because they've never had the flu before, so the flu just runs rampant. They're just literally swimming in flu particles. And boys because they're so physical, right? They're so rambunctious. They're so they're smearing themselves over every surface, right, including human beings. And that makes them incredibly efficient transmitters of the virus. So, if you want to stop a flu epidemic in its tracks, you take all the young boys out of school, right? Just keep them away from each other, and with luck quarantine them in their bedrooms.
So translate this now into New York crime.
So crime's the same way. If you understand that crime is contagious, then you understand a very small number of people are responsible for an extraordinary amount of the criminal activity and for spreading the notion that criminal activity is okay, and also that the condition of the city can be an invitation to criminal activity or a deterrent to it. And so I began to understand that what happened in New York was, one, we cleaned up the city in a kind of the physical look of the city, so it looked like someone was in charge, and that deterred criminal activity. That was like moving. It was like going outside in the summer for the cold, and also the police department became really adept at identifying who the equivalent of those 5 to 10-year-old boys were when it came to crime, and they went after those people, arrested them, put them away, and all of a sudden, the epidemic went away.
And is this your original idea? You said you asked everyone what the explanation was for the sudden disappearance of crime or diminution of crime. Did you dream up this idea on your own?
No, I rarely do. I put pieces together. There had been a whole school of sociologists who had talked about the epidemic nature of social behaviors. I hadn't seen it. I don't think I'd seen it specifically to crime, or at least to crime in New York City, but they had definitely talked about. I remember, in fact, I got started in this whole thing because I read a really wonderful paper in the library called "The Epidemic Nature of Ghetto Life" by a guy named Jonathan Crane, which really, that's where the idea came from. So that's typical of the way I work.
And then you applied it to crime. What else did you apply it to?
Well, I began to apply it to things like rumors or fashion trends, or I had a chapter about a suicide epidemic in Micronesia.
Your own book, Tipping Point, which includes all of these stories, I suppose it itself is a perfect case to illustrate its own argument. One day you were trudging around cold community halls in small towns, talking to handfuls of readers, and the next you were an international sensation. What made the tipping point for you?
I have no idea. I'll be honest. I don't.
Well, that's no good, is it? You can't set up this theory and then say here's a prime example right in front of your nose, but you can't explain it.
Well, let's see. Let's see if I can explain it. We tried with that book to put some of the ideas of the book into practice. So one of the ideas with the book was that there are these kinds of mavens, these 5 to 10-year-old boys who do all the work in spreading things.
Maven.
Yeah. So we said, well, who are the book mavens in America? Who are the people who get a kind of groundswell going around a book? Now, the Northwest states are the big reading states in